So, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be joining us from today. Welcome to our episode today, where we will be focusing on military families. And I am absolutely delighted today to welcome Claire Calder and Alan McTaggart. And I'm even more excited by the fact that this is their first visual webinar, I have just discovered. So we absolutely guarantee today that you have two absolute experts in the virtual room, and we will delve deeply into the world of military families. So Claire, if I could hand over to you first of all, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you for having me very much, Elise. And yes, I'm Claire Calder from Claire Calder Consultancy. And our core clients, I would say, are forces families. And my colleague and I, Linda Lloyd-Jones, we very much come at this role as parents, and indeed military wives ourselves. We've both been married for about 30 years each, and we've both had two children that have gone through the whole system. They both started at year 3 for both families, and still continuing to be boarding parents 15 years later. So we come, what we feel is, with a breadth of experience. We were also privileged enough to go to boarding schools ourselves, so we have a clear understanding of that boarding experience, albeit things have changed a lot since our day, for the better. And so we very much come at this, as I say, very, very personal. And for us, the boarding and the pastoral care is key. But we'll talk about that, I know, in a few more minutes. But that's my introduction.
Thank you so much, Claire. And Alan, if I could ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, Elise. Hello, everyone. My name's Alan McTaggart. I'm the Director of Operations here at Moreton Hall, and have been for the last nearly 3 years now. And I have come into the education sector from a full career in the military, and that full career spans over regimental duty, being on operations, long courses, etc. So I think that's important as we open up a discussion about support to military families. Certainly, I'm a veteran of a full career. There are many veterans at Moreton Hall. I'm glad to say I'm a father of 3 children. 2 of those have been through independent education, and taken advantage of things such as CEA into support of the military. And one of my senior roles before I did retire from the military was working in support of remuneration team in Whitehall, which as the allowances desk officer, which allowed me an insight into the preparation of the current policy, as well. So it just positions us and myself particularly well in terms of understanding the guidance that's available, and the policy that's currently out there. So yeah, hello.
Thank you both so much. Right, let's get straight stuck in. So Claire, if I may begin with yourself, I would like to ask you, what are the key factors and concerns that military families typically are considering when they're looking at their UK boarding school of choice? And how do you guide them into matching a school to their child's needs?
I think it's an interesting one for forces families, because we have quite a lot of flexibility. We're not permanently overseas. Sometimes we can be quite local to a school, and there is an element of wanting that flexibility. What I would say is, for a family such as ourselves, who went overseas for quite many years while our children were at boarding school, we were very much looking at the quality of the boarding, and for us that was a really key factor, and that is a very key factor for a lot of my families. And the thing is, with forces, we never know where we're going to be deployed next. So I have families that really feel that they're never going to go away and they're never going to go overseas, and then 6 months later they'll write to me to say, actually, we need to bring everything forward, we're off. So what I would say is, the important thing, it's not about numbers of full boarders, but it's really knowing that you offer a full 7-day week package and provision for those children. And I know from my own children who actually went to boarding schools that really did have quite large numbers of boarders. And full boarders, but there was nothing nicer for my daughter, particularly when she was at boarding school at a prep, where she would have just a few girls left in at the weekend, and she said it was always the most fun because they did things at home, they did things differently. So from that, I think it's really important, as I say, really it's the quality of the boarding, not necessarily the quantity. And that's what I always want to hear when I'm visiting schools and when I'm looking at schools for prospective clients. Another key thing, which none of you will be surprised to hear, is for your younger children. And now, bearing in mind, I'm placing a lot of 3, 4, 5s and 6s, so year 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's really important because they're very little, and I think having a really special place in that boarding house, those house parents are absolutely crucial. And I'm delighted to say that the schools that I work with have the most amazing house parents. In fact, I'd like to be in their club. Absolutely phenomenal people, but that's really important. You've got to remember for that age group, it's who's tucking them up at night, who's reading the bedtime story, and bearing in mind that prep boarding is probably very big for forces families compared to most other groups of people that are looking at boarding schools. So that's really important. Mobile phone policy, that is becoming an increasing concern for everybody. And the message is really less the better. Families are delighted to hear that mobile phones are kept far away from their children. All children have phones of some description to phone home. That's not a problem. But I feel that schools really need to have a really clear and transparent policy about this, because it's something that families really worry about. And people write to me quite regularly about this as well. Interestingly, one other thing that's popped up quite recently, and I know that everybody has these really lovely cafes, and lots of schools are opening them, and often they're open to the public, which is lovely. I'm getting more and more complaints from families, particularly military families, who are really concerned about the quality of food that's on offer. This is something that I've had 2 or 3 comments about just in the last week. And the cafes are cupcakes and coffee, cheese paninis, all sorts of things that parents really don't want them to be eating. And they also cost quite a lot. So I think that's something else that's really come up recently, that actually I think whilst it's wonderful to have a cafe, I do think there needs to be some consideration about what the children are eating, a little bit more consideration. So that's just something that, as I say, I think is a recent concern. And those are the key things. I think the final thing for me in terms of what families are looking at is the fees. Now, I know that a lot of schools are very generous, but it's just really important to note that so many families are one income families. A lot of whys, when you're moving every 2 years, and it was the same case for me for 18 years, I wasn't able to hold down a proper job. And those are one income families. Mums are on the move all of the time. So it's very difficult unless you have a work from home role. So just to give you a feel for the sort of families that are coming forward and needing boarding schools, they're often, as I say, one income families.
Thank you, Claire. And it's picking up there on the quality of boarding, the house staff, the mobile phone policy. Really interesting. The cafe as well. So we'll explore that a little bit more, and of course the facilities and the fees also. So it's probably a good point there to bring Alan in to maybe just from an operational point of view to maybe address those particular things that you've raised, and in the wider context of support systems that school should be putting in place and that perhaps Morton do already or are planning to do as well. If we could bring you in there also, Alan.
Of course, Elise, thank you. I do recognise many of the things, if not all of all of what Claire's just discussed there. And I'll try and pivot that towards the logistic support that we certainly provide at Moreton Hall. And I'm also conscious that I like to see things through the lens as a parent, as that someone that's been a receiving end of CEA, etc., and making sure we sort of conscious of all those sort of challenges and pressures to families. So linking to some of the things mentioned, I recognise for me, certainly as a parent, it was that house mistress interaction and that regular feedback that was really important. And I know we've got several boarding houses here, and that seems to follow through in terms of providing, particularly at the younger age, that regular engagement with the parents. As a parent, I'd want that, and that, I know that certainly happens through the house mistresses ongoingly, and then through the tutoring assistant, etc., and the academic program, etc. support. So I'll talk about in terms of Moreton. So I'm sort of slightly focused on Moreton and what happens here, but I think things such as transport, we haven't outsourced any of these sort of areas such as catering. Transport is particularly key because as a parent, I would think that the concern would be around flexibility, and that flexibility could be around there's a late stay or a late pickup because the parents are away or other commitments, and being able to flex that. I know certainly end of term time or even half term in XIAS, etc. Operationally, there is flexibility into those dates. And that extends also to XIATs. We staff our boarding houses for stayovers over XIAT periods, over half-term periods, etc. So that's does provide particular reassurance, I think, to those forces families that may not be able to collect, their daughter or son, or a late back, or etc. I'm also conscious from my work at the MOD that in terms of the demographics, parents may be overseas. One or both of those may be on operations or away. So it's not all that they're just at the other end of the country, they might be overseas. So there's a logistical impact there. But I think 20% of certainly the army or the military, but the army recruit from the Northwest. And I am conscious that we as a school are positioned in the Northwest, so there are family members that will be in that vicinity. Clearly we extend out to that support to the family members as well. So that's an important consideration in understanding our families. So I mentioned the flexibility, the fees. I think it's probably common practice for most schools that understand military allowances, CEA standing for Continuity of Education Allowance, in that they will offer a discount level to meet the level of CEA that's allowed by the MOD, and also conscious that families have to pay a 10% contribution. So I think certainly at Moreton Hall, we lower our fees to a level that once they paid their 10% contribution, that the amount payable is the amount that that matches the fees that we would charge. And I think a lot of schools would sometimes link to that, depending on their location and circumstances. So I think that's important to mention. And I mentioned about the boarding activities, extra clubs, sometimes breakout. When you've got some sort of 10, 12, 15 military families that the pupils have got a chance to speak to their peers, etc., and those shared anxieties that they may have. And we've got staff that are able to accommodate that. But in terms of operationally, I think I'll just headline that with the staff support, flexibility and everything we're able to provide to meet the needs of the parents, which be quite varying, as from as simple as a late pickup, staying over for a few nights, and then both the bursary support Something, for example, in the bursary that's often overlooked is that timelines for submitting your CEA claim is probably different from the timeline that the term fees go out at the end of the term. And to get your allowance, you need to submit your receipted invoice at a time to enable the money to come into when the invoice is paid. And we offer, for example, that bespoke invoice one-to-one basis that allows them to have that in good time. So I think, in summary, it's what I would expect if I was when I was a military parent, and I can see it through both sides. I suppose that helps. So I think it's flexibility is probably the key word in all of that.
I agree. That's the word. I'm sort of sitting here quietly, sort of saying to myself, flexibility, and it's really appreciated by forces families. And we were just talking earlier about, my husband was in Afghanistan for a year, and it was also quite nice to have a routine. Children like routine, and so he always had Edward and Charlie would always have a call when he was at his prep school every Thursday evening at the same time. And it's something that the school really managed very well and really supported, and that was really important at that period of time for Edward. And I think the additional flexibility if a parent is home for a short period of time, particularly if they're on operations, I think obviously the children being able to go out during that time. Schools generally are very flexible, but that really does mean a lot. And I think that's something that we've already sort of mentioned. I do know that homesickness does intensify during periods of uncertainty. Again, everyone has to also remember that children of forces families don't generally have home friends. So these children are children that are on the move. Their constant is their school, and they really look to that as their constant. And it's the thing that that's really where their life is. And as I say, they rarely have good friends at home simply because they're constantly on the move. So that's really important, I think, for everyone to understand the importance of that school community to those children. And that's really an essential part of their world. Whilst unsettling things and situations happen outside of school, it's really wonderful to keep that going at school.
And I think that idea, I love that, their school is their constant, that is so pertinent. And the boarding staff being that locus parentis, being, not replacement for mum and dad or carer, but being that number two for those parents. And with your lens, Claire, obviously as a consultant and also as a parent, we touched, and both of you have touched on the quality of boarding, the pastoral care that is so crucial to military family children. It would be good maybe to delve into what does quality of boarding look like? What does excellent look like? And also, based on your experiences, perhaps wider best practice examples where you've really seen schools being able to effectively support those military families in their educational environment.
Yeah, is that for me or is that for Alan? What would you?
That's for you, Claire. Yeah, sorry. And then I'm sure Alan will chip in as well.
Just checking. Well, I think a really lovely initiative that I've come across in a couple of schools is actually to have a military club, have a forces children's club, which I think can be really well supported by schools. And I think having spoken to the children that are involved in that really means a lot to them. And it offers a forum where children can all come together at different ages, and they can share their feelings, their thoughts. They usually have nurses or their mental health leads involved as well. And I think that is something that I think is quite a new thing. I might be wrong. I hadn't heard of it before until fairly recently, but I thought what a brilliant initiative, and would thoroughly support that, and would have loved to have had that for my own children if that had been on offer.
And just to ask you a little bit more about that, Claire. So I think that's a fantastic idea, a military forces club. And would that just be kind of general well-being check-in sessions, or does it vary in terms of types of things they might do within those clubs?
Yes, in this particular example, it was a check-in. It was a weekly session that they would have as part of their co-curricular. But they also made a point of doing a couple of fun trips as well through the year. So again, it just you don't want to single them out, but actually, I think everybody understands that that, as I say, military life can be more challenging. So that seemed to be something that was very popular within the school.
Yeah, fantastic. And have you got any other kind of examples of best practice that you feel really works, whether that could be a pastoral example, a wider school example, that you feel has been really successful for one of your families?
Yes, I think I think a couple of things. I think you mentioned it earlier, actually, Alan, about the transport, and again, facilitating as much of that process as possible. And there are a lot of families that I mean, BA stopped doing their minor unaccompanied service, so there are lots of sort of challenges, but some of the schools have got very, very joined up transport plans for those children, or indeed they work with an agency such as Airport Angels, where they've got good contact. So not only from the school side, but it can be joined up to get those children to where they need to be. That probably is a crossover for some of the international families as well, I'm sure. But I know that actually occasionally will be the deciding factor when people are looking at schools. So, and I think particularly for families that don't have perhaps a parent or a grandparent in the country, it's much easier, I think, if families do. A lot of families don't have, or they might choose a school in Taunton and granny lives in Scotland. So that's really not massively helpful when you're looking at transporting your children around the country and getting them to airports. So that's a really key thing. Schools that can actually manage that process for you is particularly helpful. And obviously that's most important when they're at prep school. As they get older, of course, it becomes a little bit easier and less worrying. The other thing as well, we were talking about the pre-season events. Now we're slightly going off track when looking at the sort of pastoral, but it's just, again, something to consider that families coming back. I know it happened to us on a number of occasions where there were pre-season events, rugby training or cricket, depending on what time of year, of course. And they would be on a Saturday and a Sunday, and then boarders wouldn't be needed to be in until Monday night. What do those children do for 12 hours? It's those sort of logistical concerns that, and I'm sure those are very much felt by international families as well. But anything to try and make things a little smoother, it is hugely appreciated. But I would say that the two things I think would be transport, but also the lovely idea of that forces group that was encouraged to get together and share experiences. Oh, and the other thing, of course, is joining children up together if they are indeed flying backwards and forwards to the same countries. But that really does fall into the whole transport discussion.
And I know when we were just discussing podcast, when we talked about how you were saying it can be, I loved your phrase, discombobulating for students, and the idea of, deployment and moving around. And I guess that really accentuates these things that you're talking about even more so for those particular families as well.
Yeah,
and I guess
absolutely.
I guess it schools working very closely with yourself in terms of really understanding and being educated about the fibre of a military family as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the all change constantly can be very discombobulating. And I think in terms of the best practice, which is what we're looking at here, there are two or three house parents that constantly come up on in conversation about the absolutely incredible job that they do. So it is going probably a little bit beyond the expectation that really, and of course, families talk. The military community is a small community, and as I say, there are a couple of names that pop up on Facebook groups regularly because they are so outstanding at what they do and how they do it. So providing that really, and I think we all have to remember that even I'm thinking of prep schools there, but I think as children get older, and I'm thinking about colleagues and friends that have talked to me about their boarding experiences. Young boys from the age of 13 to 18 are hugely influenced by those house parents. They have
Absolutely.
an incredible role to play in their development and their whole social and emotional well-being, and in addition to obviously their academic development. And I think looking at it as a consultant and indeed a parent, I think house parents have to sort of really think about the effect and the positive effect that they're having on these children. And I know my my own experience, was really, really special. And those are really fundamental years that really set those children up. So I think sort of schools thinking very carefully about that special relationship that those families have. And I think those families have I think where it's very family focused as well, where I think going back to the best practice schools that really include the families and really encourage that relationship, I think is a really key thing.
Absolutely. And Alan, if then I can pass over to you to maybe pick up on any of that kind of logistical or admin support that we perhaps might not have covered as yet. And also in that context, I guess in terms of Moreton Hall, which is what we know the best in terms of how as a school, we are supporting that and how we're able to support all those fundamentals that Claire has just spoken about so poignantly as well.
Sorry, I did get that. It's rather noisy outside. Lots of excited people around. So again, it's in terms of those important ingredients, in terms of the importance of, it all pivots around, always goes back to house missions in my view. So in terms of independent schools, again, you expect the schools to be academically strong, and you get that in terms of your review of the school, and you do your due diligence, and you check. Sometimes it's that feel when you go to a school. I remember visiting many schools where my daughters were going, and it's sometimes that feel in terms of the boarding house. Home from home is the phrase that I like to use. It's provided me reassurance as a military parent that then they can settle back, put their feet up, they'll be looked after. There's a duty of care in there to make sure that is not extended to them misbehaving, or there's the right policy in terms of looking after them, in terms of phone policy, online, etc. So all the security's there, but it's that home from home feeling. And I know from my own daughters, they still speak to their house mistress many years on after having left school. So it's a very special relationship. In terms of Moreton Hall, that extends, I think about weekend activities. I know it's something logistically in terms of the operations support, that we make sure that school doesn't finish on a Friday and start on a Monday. We are a traditional boarding school here. Conscious that's 25%, not 100% that stay that board automatically. We're fortunate that nearly 60% do flexi, but it's that, okay, what do you do at the weekend? So that it extends through that pastoral care into the activities and making sure there's something really to occupy the mind and excite the pupils. and that works really well here. So I would, like I say, I would extend it out to the activities piece. And I know, and then that includes things such as clubs. We've got a combined cadet force, etc. And you've got all those sort of sports and extra curriculum activities. And also, I know some of the pupils here, for example, we provide, again, it does pivot a lot around transport. Is we allow transport and they go out and go horse riding, or they may be a member of a particular club, or they may be a country, representative sports person of hockey or England lacrosse or etc. And we're able to sort of fit that into our transport program. So I think that's important. And I think I'll just go back all the way to the beginning when we talked about, in terms of the value to the pupils, really, or, not only that continuity of education, because it is what it says on the tin in that respect, but in terms of that friendship groups, providing them with, I myself was a military school child, having to move schools every 2 or 3 years, and so therefore you're changing your friendship group, etc. But also the fact that if you're playing representative sports, when you think this through, if you're a particularly good rugby player and you're pushing to county level and etc. And then you've got to change school or etc. You've got to start etc. So all these growing friendship groups are particularly important. But at the heart of all that, and then what's in terms of that that support to the parents is the house mistress. They're the ones that are going to allow you to ring every night or when you can, or they're the 24/7 cover. So you entirely agree with what Claire's saying. I think it's obvious. Well, something may not be obvious, but it's so much more than just onboarding people.
And I think that, it takes me back to what Claire said, that small numbers are okay. It's about the level of care that child is getting, having stuff for them. And, it's the same also with our international students, they don't want to be by themselves entirely at a weekend. They want to have a kind of a tribe around them. It doesn't have to be a massive tribe. There just needs to be something that is
Yeah,
there for
I
them.
think you're right in the sense that that extends past, in a way. Yeah, I like the military group bits, and just so we can, they keep their identity and their shared experiences in terms of, they've all got to go and travel overseas, etc. But also there's mentoring through the boarding cycle. There's cross, interaction across the year groups. Shared values in that sense, and so that works particularly well. So that's important. And certainly having, I suppose, from an operations point of view, having the right boarding house that's furnished in the right way. It's not just a bed. It's it's comfortable.
Home.
So all common rooms fit into the different age groups. They can sit back and relax. It's one of those, like I say, home from home can't be used too much. And then in terms of also, in addition to that, to having that right parental control secondary, obviously through the house mistresses and access. So so boarding, I mean, that's what's going to keep, I think, our pupils happy, isn't it?
And if I may, Claire, direct the final question to you initially. We touched on deployment, and obviously there would be other service-related circumstances that you are au fait with, you're expert in, having had personal experience yourself with your children and as a consultant. I'm interested to know the advice you give to military families in terms of that need for, I suppose, the communication on the other side also, in terms of communication around the deployment and other service related circumstances, and also how flexible the school needs to be with all of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think that's a very good point. And I think flexibility is probably the buzzword, isn't it, really, for everything that we've talked about. And it's having that understanding and that culture of supporting children that are living slightly unusual lives through what their parents are doing for their careers. So I think I think that's sort of the thing that I would stress most, and that's what I think families that I'm helping all of the time, they really appreciate that. And also, I think going to admissions. So that's obviously the front of house experience for families, and having again accommodating extraordinary times when parents might be back in the UK to come for visits. It's sort of that really from the start of the process right through, that really sets a scene for a family, and gives you that sense of we can do this. This is going to be a good team effort, because absolutely that's exactly what it is. It is parents, it's yourselves, and it's the pupil, and that has to work together. So I think that's an interesting point, and obviously your key role, Elise, and having that sense of there's nothing that can't be managed and there's nothing that's too much trouble, I think has a big effect. And I think also because forces families are sending their children when they're quite young, there is an increased sense of concern and worry, because it stands to reason that children that are less than 10 years old, parents naturally feel that slightly more concerned about them going off to boarding school, and I think that has a big effect. And I think that first step into a school, and very much what you said, Alan, about having that feel, and it isn't about the surroundings, it isn't about facilities, it's not about it being shiny, it's the people that are in it. It's the people that meet and greet you and show you the school, and the staff that are looking after your children. That is absolutely, where it sort of really starts and where it ends for me.
And I would say, you touched there obviously on admissions, and that open door, whether that be a physical or metaphorical door, that that we are akin to the needs of our military families, and that they can connect with us when they need to connect with us. It's how we change our mindset to accommodate them is so important, and that we're welcoming of our military families, our international families, our domestic families, all with different needs and different time zones and balancing acts that they have to do. And it's so incredibly important to have that specific understanding, I feel, of military family, to be able to make them feel reassured. And as Alan said, when he was looking for his daughters, before I entrust my child, I want to make sure that this person I know can absolutely take as good care of my child as I can. But I think the one thing you're being very humble about, Claire, is that it also comes to a relationship with really good consultants for admissions. And I know that if we have a military family, if I'm talking to you, I'm going to get the best advice, because you look at it with the child at the centre of it, based on your experiences as mom, as wife of somebody in the military, but also the great care and attention that you take to place your families in the absolute right school. And you are that voice, you are the trust that families have to place their child in the right school. So I think that relationship of consultants really knowing their schools for their military families, because it should be a given we all have the glossy swimming pool and gym and amphitheatre. But we're talking, and you said, the year groups that you're working with, it's so important that it is about the trust, but it's about knowing your schools and knowing what is best for that child. And those needs between every child, I imagine, is different and varying anyway.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that the schools that we work with at Calder Consultancy are exceptional, because they are delivering that level of care, and I think that's really the important, and very much, as Alan said, the academics are almost a given. What we're really interested to know is the differences of that core care of your children. So I think that's a very valid point.
And I think, Alan, if we kind of come to a final word from yourself, in terms of, I mean, I feel incredibly lucky at Morton because if we have any, mention of military, I just come and run into your office or pick up the phone and talk to you with your wealth of experience. And not all schools may be lucky enough to have an Alan in that respect. So, what can schools do to really have done their due diligence and to really give the very best to military families?
Well, one of the first things I did when I came to Morton, I know, was we applied for the military covenant. I mean, that certainly sends the right message. And something that obviously you can share. I think it's complex. I mean, I know, if you go back to, military officers and soldiers thinking about embarking on not only being quite anxious of, entrusting their child in someone else's care, potentially in another country, is also the policies can seem quite complex and quite daunting. And I say that not because I helped update the last policy when I was in London, but I have it, so therefore I had to sort of dissect it completely. But that can be quite daunting. So in terms of just breaking down those barriers, one is, I think is, as most schools do, I think that do are quite good at hosting military families, etc., is understand the military person. You take time out to do that. Speak. What you say about Claire's a perfect example in terms of somebody who's actually lived and breathed as a parent, going through that in children, and then being able to offer professional advice as well. I think is particularly important. So I think it's understand the person you're trying to serve, really, in terms of the complications that go with that. And then understand the process, because certainly, I mean, what I'm in a fortunate position to do, but is offer that one-to-one and sit down and speak with parents when they come in. I know you asked me to sit down and be part of that admissions process, because again, it just reassures a parent that there's someone at the end of a phone that will understand that they need an invoice at a particular week and not when it actually goes out. They need it to match, in terms of how does it link to CEA and explaining that, that process, etc. So just to reassure them that in terms of that support is there available to them. And that's slightly different from, I will say, slightly different from house mistress, pastoral care. The parents will naturally reach out that way, etc. But to having someone different that's apart from that, just to, the perhaps we call it the business side of to be able to reach out to, I think is important. So understand the person you're supporting, and understand the policy and guidance that's available. Sounds a bit binary, that, but I think it's important because you need to be able to sit down and offer that personal advice to someone, and have confidence in your product, of course.
Okay. Right, Claire, Alan, thank you so much. I think we've covered a real breadth of the key topics there, and really important for, for me as a school. I feel I've got some real key takeaways there, and it makes us reassess perspective and lenses, which is so incredibly important, as we know education is ever evolving. So thank you to you both for today. And I'm sure that our listeners will have some really insightful takeaways from today. So thank you both so much.
Thank you very much, Liz.